Arkane has been on a roll in the past few years. They did the 2 Dishonored games, and then Prey. Then, last year, they released Deathloop. And it just didn't click. I mean, it's not bad, but it just doesn't hold up to their prior games. I mean, the concept is the same as their previous entries. You have a character with semi-magical powers in a story-heavy single-person narrative. Just like Dishonored, it involves taking out a series of targets. However, being in a time loop, it's almost exactly like the DLC to Prey, Mooncrash, which used a computer-based historical simulation as the background to explain repeating things over and over again. However, Deathloop falls on its face, in no small part because of the loop. The core mechanic and drawing point is also its biggest weakness. Here are its problems, in no particular order. First, backtracking. Everything is exactly the same every time in Deathloop. That's the problem. It's exactly the same. There is slight change in how people are armed based on how well you're doing, but if you go into the complex in the afternoon, you know exactly who is where and how to kill them. You are effectively backtracking through all the levels constantly, as, due to the loop, you have to do many things several times. Now, fortunately, many of these repeat tasks are very small, so you don't have the same intricate, lengthy levels that Dishonored enjoyed. Secondly, it's way too hard to figure out what you have to do. Each of the 4 maps are accessible at 4 times of the day, and most of the visionaries have to be killed multiple times in order to complete the loop. You generally progress towards the end goal by investigating the visionaries' labs and personal spaces after killing them. But these areas are both big and cluttered. It is really easy to miss the one critical note that tells you what you need to do and not even know that you have something missing. I performed the sniper duel with Igor 3 times before I found the one note that appeared on the board with a code to break his experiment. I still don't know how I was supposed to know where Charlie and Fia's secret meeting place was, given that it's on the backside of a cliff that you have no real way to know has a secret path back there. In all of Arkane's prior games, the path to the conclusion was fairly clear. I never sat down with Corvo and Morgan and said, well, now what? While playing Cult, this was a regular occurrence. Thirdly, it's shockingly shallow. Deathloop has a good bit of depth that's just not really explored. There's an entire spy secret mission that you can only find if you find their hidden bunker in Fristad Rock, which is only accessible via a shoreline which you have no reason to ever go down. The Pact to Smoke side quest requires 3 different loops where you have to sabotage a suicide pact for each person, then find them later in the day in a completely different section of the map. Even then, there's surprisingly little depth. There are only 3 characters with whom Colt can actually have a conversation. While the constant radio rapport with Juliana is good and in depth, the surprise encounter with Pick is great, but really short, and the talks with 2-Bit are purely functional. The longest side mission, the spy story, starts out good, but in the end is just a board full of hints. This makes the big revelation that this is a distant sequel to Dishonored a giant wasted opportunity, as there's no explanation of how it ties in or what's happening. The word void isn't even uttered, despite the slabs in the loop itself being obvious void magic. The ending might even be the heart's prophecy that the void will consume the real world. But such an outcome is never even hinted at in the game. I get that they wanted to do a more personal story between Colt and his daughter, but there are too many unanswered questions for that as well. Fourthly, power. You know how I mentioned that everything was exactly the same every time? Well, you aren't. You start off with one automatic handgun and no powers. You quickly amass an arsenal of elite weapons and magic. On the other hand, the limited loadout of only 2 powers and 3 weapons greatly restricts your abilities. This encourages you to find something that works for you and only use that. After the early game, I ended up with this loadout: the sniper rifle, Charlie's shotgun, and the dual pistol from the complex. Add in shift and the shared fate power. I never varied it. Shift especially is just too useful to not use for platforming. The thing is, all areas have similar enemies, and you have to fight at mixed ranges in all maps. You need a long range and some form of high-powered close-in range. There were times I switched out the pistols for a silenced weapon or a nail gun for added stealth, but that was rare. Since the enemies are the same from the beginning to end, this presents the question of, well, why bother with stealth? As there's no story penalty, it's generally easier just to lure people to a kill zone and blast them all, as trying to stealth and failing will put you in a worse situation, and many parts of the levels just aren't built for stealth. However, you will generally have a health machine and an ammo dispenser available. The only people that this isn't viable for is Alexis's party. That's not because it's hard, it's just tedious to kill over 50 people in that party. So, can this be done better? Well, to be frank, it has. Let's compare Deathloop to its most recent predecessor, Mooncrash, which, in retrospect, was the prototype for the loop mechanic. While Prey's main story is very immersive, Mooncrash is extremely video gamey. You get points for objectives and killing monsters. It actually has a top score mechanic. And there is a point buy system for what you carry into the level. Mooncrash limits your powers by making the loadout cost points. With a strong pistol and a lot of bullets, you can fend off most enemies, but you're still a glass cannon. You never get to a point where you can just smash through the game completely. So how does Mooncrash solve the problem of repeating? Each objective has to be cleared only once, and afterwards completing it is shortened. For example, the first time you have to escape in the shuttle, you have to find the piloting connector. After that, all you need to do is get to the shuttle. The story missions aren't terribly long, but they are memorable, and there's no attempt to piece everything together into a coherent timeline. You are completing objectives in a video game, and it works because it's so blatant about it. On the other hand, Dishonored and Prey proper are more narrative focused. There's no choose your loadout screen. Your powers are all present and selectable, and your guns are carried with you. People you kill stay dead, and that has consequences in the story. Some people you save come with you, and you accumulate a crew. Deathloop seems to be walking the line between video game feel and story feel, and thus it falls flat on both sides. So in conclusion, how could they have fixed the game? I think there are a number of small changes that would have really improved Deathloop. First, you need to make the game not feel so lonely. The talks to Juliana are nice, but it's nothing compared to the full crew that both Corvo and Morgan acquired. If you had a crew that you could talk to on a regular basis while progressing the story, a Firelink shrine where people you helped would group up, that would solve a lot of the problems of the empty narrative. You could give some explanation of how they retain their memories, and then have them have some interaction to get the final loop going. Secondly, call in the butterfly effect, so that enemies are randomly placed and have different random conversations. The same levels with similar situations won't have the same problem as having exactly the same of everything every time. It will be a stealth puzzle, not rote repetition. Thirdly, remove the limited loadout for powers, which actively punishes experimentation. If you can bring all of your powers to bear so you can play with them and switch tactics as needed, then that will greatly improve your options and encourage trying new things. Additionally, you should allow at least 4 weapons. This will allow you to bring a dedicated stealth weapon without actually crippling you in a firefight. Fourthly, you need to add eagle vision of some form. Now, I know it's an overused trope, being also detective vision, Witcher sense, and yes, Dishonored's dark vision. But at least they need to add a highlight unused interactables. This would be a major quality of life improvement that help find important notes in these overcluttered environments. And finally, we need to add more interaction with the Void and the Dishonored universe as a whole. You have people actively researching this stuff, so bring the Dishonored stuff in early and openly, and have scientists like Igor and Wingy question what's going on outside the loop. Build up to the anomaly at the end. Don't just have a personal story and then a surprise, the world ended twist. Now, I'm not suggesting huge changes to the basic game, but each of my suggestions would greatly improve both the gameplay and story and turn a passable game into a great game. Because there is the foundation of a great game in here. It just doesn't work in its current form. Thanks for listening, y'all.